The wind howled through the rafters of the old farmhouse like a ghost trying to remember its name. Walter Briggs stood in the middle of his barn shotgun in hand, staring at the hollow space where his feed sacks used to be. Something had torn through them, not animals. Too clean, no mess, no spilled grain, just gone. The wooden floor creaked beneath his boots. He wasn't breathing. His lungs locked somewhere between fear and fury. Outside, the last light of a Nebraska sun slipped under the horizon, bleeding across the dusty fields like a dying ember. The wheat hadn't grown right in 2 seasons. The well pump sputtered air more than water. And now this, another thing slipping out from under him. Walter lowered the shotgun slowly and ran a hand through his coarse gray hair. He listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No engine in the distance. Just the breath of wind across brittle corn stubble. But he felt it, that pressure in the air, the kind that used to come just before a dust storm hit. Like something heavy was circling. He closed the barn door, bolted it with shaking hands, and made the walk back to the house with a stride too slow to be confident. Something was off. Had been for months. But this was different. 6 hours earlier, it had been just another lonely morning. Walter had risen before dawn, not because there was much left to do on the farm, but because he couldn't sleep anymore. The bed was too cold. Had been ever since June died 4 years back. Some people faded after losing someone. Walter didn't. He calcified, hardened, became part of the land that no longer grew. He sipped his black coffee on the porch, watching the early light break over his fields. They looked like scarred skin, dry, uneven, cracking at the edges. The soil used to be rich here, black like oil, full of promise. Now it was just dust and regret. Beyond the split-rail fence, 2 of his last cows wandered half-heartedly over the pasture. They moved like ghosts, quiet, aimless, slow. Like him. He set the mug down and pulled a folded copy of the Prairie County Weekly from his coat pocket. He didn't read the obits anymore. Too familiar. He barely looked at the headlines. Politics and corn prices weren't his concern these days. But a small boxed ad in the bottom corner snagged his attention. Estate auction. Machinery tools. Property of Harold Goodwin. Deceased. Ironworks near Whitlock. Harold Goodwin. That name hadn't been said aloud in town since Walter was a boy. Everyone knew about the Goodwin Iron Works. They said the factory shut down before World War II ended, but no one knew why. Some claimed Harold made machines for the army. Others whispered darker things, rumors of missing inventory, hush-money investigators who came and disappeared. Nothing ever confirmed. Walter frowned. Tools. Machinery. His gaze flicked to his own busted tractor sitting like a dead elephant beside the barn. Its paint long gone, belts dry-rotted, gears rusted solid. He had no business spending money. Hell, he barely had any to spend. But something about that word machinery poked at the part of him that hadn't quite gone numb yet. He folded the paper. Maybe there was something useful out there. Maybe something he could fix, or just sit beside and remember what it felt like to build something that ran. Maybe some things look dead, he muttered, 'cause they're just waiting to be seen. At 9 a.m., Walter hooked up his trailer and made the hour-long drive toward Whitlock. The road curved through forgotten farmland, grain silos leaning like drunks, barns collapsed into themselves, skeletons of a better time. He passed 2 houses with porch lights still on in daylight. Signs of loneliness. He recognized the feeling. When he pulled into the auction yard, the smell of hot diesel and rust hit like a punch. Trucks lined the dirt lot. Farmers and old gearheads milled around equipment piles, engine blocks, augers, broken combines, rust-bitten threshers. Walter moved slow, quiet. He didn't wave to anyone. Didn't know most of them, and didn't care to be known. But when he reached the far edge of the lot, he stopped and stared. There, half swallowed by weeds and shadow, was a beast. It wasn't just a tractor. It was something older, something primal. Its iron skin was pitted with rust bolts eaten through with time. A tall smokestack jutted from its back like a sentinel. Its nameplate, barely legible under grime, read, Titan, 1918. Walter stepped closer. The wheels were 6 feet tall, sunk into the dirt like the machine had been trying to bury itself. That thing hasn't moved since the Hoover administration, a voice said behind him. Walter turned to see a young auction hand smirking. They say Goodwin brought it over from Illinois. One of the first steam tractors. Thing's more sculpture than equipment now. No one wants it. Walter didn't reply. He just stared at the Titan. There was something about the way it stood, forgotten, stubborn, ugly as sin, but still standing. Still there. The auction started. People bid fast and loud on the smaller tools. Engine parts went for $20. A cracked oil pump for 10. Nobody moved toward the Titan. When the auctioneer called for bids, he laughed as he did it. Antique steam tractor, one of a kind. No guarantee it even has guts. Start me at 50, silence. 2010, still nothing. Walter felt something move in his chest, something old. He raised his hand. 1. A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. The auctioneer grinned. Sold to the gentleman with the backbone for $1. That evening, Walter chained the Titan to his trailer, the winch groaning with the weight of history. People watched, but no one said much. Most probably figured he was crazy. But as he drove away, the sunset caught the tractor's flanks, and for just a second, the steel seemed to glow. He arrived home after dark, parked the trailer by the barn, unhooked the chains, stood there a long moment. The Titan loomed like a rusted god, quiet under the stars. Worth $1, Walter muttered. Maybe more, if it stands proud enough. $1 for history, huh? Hope it don't cost you more. The words echoed in Walter Briggs's head as he stood in front of the Titan the next morning, coffee steaming in the chilled air, the old machine casting a long shadow across the frost-bitten ground. It sat still as a monument, hulking and grave. Its rusted panels shimmered faintly in the sunrise like dried blood beneath steel skin. He hadn't dreamt of anything last night, no whispers, no creaks, no shadowed figures at the window. But there had been that one sound just before he drifted off. A single metallic clink from the barn. He hadn't gone to check. Not out of fear, but something more primal. A hesitation in the gut. Like the kind you feel before opening a door you're not sure you locked. Or stepping into water that looks too still. Now in daylight, the fear seemed foolish. It was just an old tractor. A hunk of dead steel. That's what he told himself. But even now, standing beside it, he felt a presence from it, like the thing was watching him back. Walter exhaled and took a slow sip. The wind brushed past his ears, dry and thin. He walked toward the Titan boots, crunching over brittle grass, and ran a hand along the side of the boiler. Cold, pitted, coarse as tree bark. You've seen better days, he muttered. The wheels were partially sunk into the ground, their iron spokes buried in years of neglect. It must have weighed close to 8 tons, maybe more. Moving, it had been a miracle, or a mistake. He circled the rear, inspecting the riveted seams. Some of the joints had warped with time, but the core structure somehow held strong. He tapped the side with his knuckle. A dull thud. Solid. Dead. Satisfied, or pretending to be, he returned to the house to finish his coffee. The wind picked up, whistling past the eaves. The house felt too quiet again. It always did these days. By noon, he'd pulled his toolbox from the shed and parked it next to the Titan. Just to clean it up, he told himself. Not to start it. Not really. There was no fuel, no boiler pressure, no hope of reviving a corpse like this. But still giving it a second life, even just a cosmetic one, felt like giving himself something to do again. Walter started with the basics: wire brush, steel scraper, WD-40. Rust flaked off like dead skin. He worked the nameplate first, careful, slow. Beneath decades of grime, the letters slowly emerged. Titan, 1918. He felt something stir in his chest. The year of war's end. His grandfather had fought in France, came back with half a leg and a 1,000-yard stare. This machine, built in that same year, felt less like a tractor now and more like a relic from another world. Hours passed. Walter lost track of time, lost in rhythm. Scrape, wipe, polish, step back, inspect. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long fingers of orange across the barn wall. At some point, he crouched beside the firebox door and gave it a gentle tug. It didn't budge. He frowned and fetched a wrench. Rust had sealed it tight, like the past didn't want to be pried open. He twisted, heard the strained groan of old metal, and finally, with a loud crack, the latch gave. He grinned faintly. Victory. The firebox creaked open, revealing blackened, soot-crusted carbon, and something else, something odd. He peered inside. The echo didn't sound right. He knocked once against the inside wall, expected a hollow clang. Got something. Heavier, duller, like the sound was bouncing off more metal behind the wall. Solid. He blinked, leaned in and knocked again, moving along the curved wall. The tone changed halfway around. That's not how a firebox is built. Something's behind it. A second layer. His curiosity flared like a match head. He stepped back, pulled out his flashlight, and leaned in again. The beam caught on an edge. Welds. Clean. Not like the rest of the Titan. Newer. Smoother. Precise. This wasn't repair. It was concealment. Someone had hidden something inside this machine. And that was no longer a coincidence. He stood still, mind ticking. Why? What the hell had Goodwin done? The next day, he called an old name from his past. Elijah Harrow. They'd served together once, not in combat, but in the factory trenches, assembling equipment for the Army during the Cold War years. Eli had gone deeper than Walter ended up in engineering contracts for government agencies, then disappeared into retirement in Missouri. A widower, too. Walter hadn't spoken to him in 10 years, but today he needed someone who could see this with sharper eyes. Eli answered after 3 rings. The voice sounded older but still had steel. Briggs, yeah. Well, I'll be damned. I figured you'd finally been buried in that rust bucket you call a farm. Walter hesitated. I found something, Eli. Inside a Titan. A real one. 1918. That's not a sentence I expected to hear today. You ever hear of Goodwin Iron Works silence? Yeah. Rumors. I think I bought one of their ghosts. 2 days later, Eli arrived in a faded blue truck toolbox in the back and whiskey on his breath. They walked to the Titan in the late afternoon sun. Eli crouched, flashlight in hand, peered into the firebox, tapped the inner wall just like Walter had. Then he straightened slowly. That's a sealed compartment. No doubt none. And those welds. This ain't farmer work. This is government grade. Military spec. Walter folded his arms. What the hell would the government need to hide in a tractor? Eli looked at him. Whatever it was, they didn't want it found. That night, Walter lay awake. The house groaned like it remembered something, too. He stared at the ceiling hands folded across his chest. He was a farmer, not a historian, not a spy. But this thing in his barn, it wasn't just steel and soot. It was a secret. And maybe, just maybe, someone still wanted it that way. He rolled over, eyes toward the window. No sound outside. But that didn't mean he wasn't being watched. In the shadows of the barn beneath the belly of the Titan, something shifted. A rivet rolled loose. A whisper of air moved through the seams, and deep inside, behind the false wall of the firebox, something waited. That's not rust in there. That's something hiding. Walter muttered the words under his breath as the grinder in his hands sparked and screamed against steel. Sweat traced down the creases in his jaw despite the crisp October air slicing through the barn. The scent of burning metal choked the space, sharp and bitter, clinging to his clothes and skin like guilt. He had set up early tools spread neatly across the workbench. Torch, grinder, hammers, flashlight. Every motion was measured, deliberate. Eli stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the sparks dance. "You sure about this, Eli?" asked, eyes fixed on the seam that Walter had started to cut. "I wasn't sure when I bought it," Walter replied, not looking up. "But now, I need to know what's inside." The grinder bit deeper. Beneath the top layer of aged steel, another glinted, smoother, newer. Whoever had sealed this compartment had done so with skill, precision. This wasn't some makeshift farmer fix. This was engineered concealment. Walter paused, letting the tool rest, the shrill whine dying into silence. The barn, once filled with the grind and whir of metal, felt suddenly too quiet. Eli took a slow step forward and squinted into the cut. "Looks like some kind of alloy barrier. That's not original to the Titan." "No way." Walter nodded and picked up a hammer. With a few steady strikes, the metal groaned in protest. One more swing, louder, sharper, and the panel cracked loose with a sound like bone splitting. It fell with a heavy clang onto the dirt floor. Both men froze. Behind the removed panel in the belly of the old firebox lay a narrow cavity. Inside were 3 bundles tightly wrapped in faded brown canvas and bound with string. They were stacked like loaves of bread in an old baker's oven, carefully placed, deliberately hidden. Walter reached in and dragged one of the bundles out. It was surprisingly heavy, denser than any engine part he'd lifted. He set it gently on the workbench and began to cut away the string. Eli leaned in silent. As the final knot came loose, Walter peeled back the canvas. Gold. Not just colored metal, real gold. Dull yellow, thick and stamped. Each bar bore markings, a set of numbers, a government seal, and beneath it the faint outline of a crown beside a star. Walter's breath caught. The weight of the moment pressed against his ribs. Eli let out a long, low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. That's not just something hiding, Walt. That's something worth killing over." Walter opened the second bundle. More bars, but this time tucked between the metal papers. Thick, yellowed sheets folded and sealed. Some were typed in blocky font, others bore handwritten notes in pen strokes that trembled with urgency. He held one up to the light. Manifest number 14. Industrial Reconstruction Shipment Property of the War Department. 1919. Another document had a different seal, the Department of Commerce stamped cleanly in the corner. A line in faded ink caught Walter's eye, shipment rerouted by special order. Rotterdam, New York, Chicago. Eli reached for the next page. "This is military," he said. "Official cargo, meant for post-war aid or operations. But this never got where it was supposed to go." Walter said nothing. He just kept reading, absorbing every detail. Each page unraveled more confusion. Cargo weights, route changes, captain signatures. One name repeated Captain E. Hughes. Another sheet bore a signature for a Major R.T. Kellerman, U.S. Army liaison. "This doesn't make sense," Walter muttered. "Why hide this in a tractor?" Eli turned to look at the Titan's husk. "Because it could move through the country unnoticed, disguised as farm equipment. No one questions a machine that looks like it belongs in the dirt." Walter frowned. "But why Nebraska? Why Goodwin? He was just an industrialist." Eli tapped a page. "Not just industrial. He built military transports during the war. Had contracts. My guess, he skimmed off the top, rerouted a shipment, and hid part of it here. Maybe he planned to move it later. Maybe he died before he could." Walter stared down at the papers, the gold, the history folded in layers of lies. The third bundle was different. When he opened it, it wasn't gold inside. It was a map. Folded carefully, drawn on parchment. One side detailed routes across the Atlantic, red pencil marks tracing a path into the American Midwest. Walter squinted. One of the lines terminated at a name he knew too well, Whitlock, N.E. Eli stood rigid. They marked it. They planned this. This was a whole operation. Walter turned the map toward the dim light of the barn. In the bottom corner, written in elegant script, "Hold until recalled." He felt a chill settle in his spine. Those weren't shipping notes. That was a command. Eli's voice was quiet. This wasn't just theft. This was a cover-up. And if someone marked that cargo as "hold until recalled," that means it was meant to stay buried, maybe forever. The barn groaned above them as the wind picked up. Somewhere outside, a dog barked in the distance. Walter looked down at the gold, then the map, then the dark cavity where it had all been hidden for nearly a century. He suddenly felt exposed, like a veil had lifted from something sacred or dangerous. "I can't take this to the bank," he said flatly. Eli smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, you can't. You take this to the wrong person, and you disappear." They stood in silence. Then Walter reached for the canvas, rewrapped the bundles, and walked to the back of the barn. In the corner was an old grain bin with a false bottom he'd used years ago to hide cash from the taxman. He pried up the boards, laid the bundles inside, and covered them with a rusted sheet of tin. Only after that did he exhale fully. "Now what?" Eli asked. "I don't know," Walter admitted. "But someone put all that in there for a reason. And someone might still be looking for it." Walter nodded. They walked out of the barn and locked it behind them. The sun was going down again, spilling fire across the flatland sky. As they stepped onto the porch, Eli said quietly, "You ever feel like you weren't meant to find something? Like maybe it found you?" Walter didn't answer. But later that night, as he lay in bed with the house too quiet and his heart too loud, he remembered something. That sound. The clink. It hadn't come from him. It had come from the Titan, and whatever was hidden in that machine had been waiting. "You ever feel like your land's not yours anymore?" Walter asked the question out loud to no one, his voice swallowed by the wind as it skimmed over the fields. The sky was bruising toward dusk that hour, when the air turns to copper and the horizon feels closer than it should. He stood by the porch, staring across the pasture where his fence line ran crooked. The cows weren't grazing. They stood still, heads turned toward the barn, like they'd heard something he hadn't. Their stillness made the hair on his arms rise. It was the third night in a row something had felt wrong. It started with the sound. 2 nights ago, Walter had been in bed, lights off, the Titan sealed tight in the barn. No wind, no storm, just the familiar ticking of the old kitchen clock echoing through the silence. Then came the clink, not loud, but sharp, like metal on metal from somewhere inside the barn. He'd sat up, heart-thudding, shotgun within reach, but the sound didn't repeat. He convinced himself it was the machine settling. Steel contracts, wood shifts, age moves. But the next night there had been tire tracks. He found them by the mailbox at dawn, fresh imprints in the dirt from a vehicle that had turned off the main road, pulled up to the edge of his drive, then backed out. No reason for anyone to stop there. And no one had knocked. Walter erased them with the heel of his boot, just in case. But now tonight the feeling returned stronger, like something in the air had shifted. The calm felt too clean, too exact, as if it had been placed there deliberately. He turned and walked toward the barn, key in hand. The padlock on the main door was intact. He tested it anyway. Still locked. Still sealed. He stared at the door, frowning. Everything looked untouched. But instinct scratched the back of his skull. He unlocked it, pushed the heavy wood inward, and stepped inside. The familiar scent of oil straw and metal filled his nose. The Titan stood where it always had, looming like a rusted monument in the center of the barn. Nothing seemed different. Still, Walter walked around it, checking. Nothing missing. No moved tools. The floor was dusty but undisturbed, until he got to the back corner near the grain bin. There a smudge, barely visible in the dim light. A slight discoloration in the dust, like someone had stood there and shifted their weight. Walter crouched, ran his fingers across the mark. It wasn't his boot print. Wider tread. Military issue. He rose slowly, every muscle coiled tight. Someone had been inside. He moved to the grain bin and lifted the false floor. The bundles were still there. All three. Gold, papers, map. But as he reached for the edge of the parchment map to check it, something else caught his eye. An envelope. It hadn't been there yesterday. It was resting on top of the canvas. Yellowed. No stamp. No handwriting. Just a flat, aged envelope. Walter's hand hovered above it. Then he picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed in precise, old-fashioned font. You don't understand what you've uncovered. Do not contact anyone. Do not dig further. Some things were meant to stay buried. No signature. No sender. His chest tightened. He read it again. And again. Each time the message felt heavier. He looked toward the Titan. Its frame cast a long, crooked shadow across the barn wall. It felt less like a machine now, and more like a sentry, silent, patient, ancient. He reburied the bundles, sealed the bin, and backed away. By the time he made it to the porch, night had fully fallen. Stars blinked overhead. The house creaked behind him like an old dog groaning in its sleep. He sat in the worn wooden chair and stared at the Field's shotgun across his lap, envelope in hand. Who had written it? Someone who had been inside the barn. Someone who knew exactly where to look. That note hadn't been a warning. It had been a promise. He thought of calling Eli but hesitated. Eli would demand action, movement. Walter wasn't sure he was ready for that. So instead, he did the only thing that made sense. He drove into town the next morning. The library in Whitlock was small, 2 floors red brick built before the war. The place still smelled of wood polish and paper. Maggie Quinn sat behind the desk, half glasses low on her nose, her white hair tied in a bun. She looked up and blinked when Walter walked in. "Well, if it isn't the last man in town who still remembers card catalogs," she said, a smile forming. "I need your archives," Walter said. "Back issues. 1918, 1919. Anything on Harold Goodwin." Her smile faded. She nodded once. "Follow me." They walked to the back where a small room held the microfilm machine and rows of filing cabinets. Walter explained just enough to make it sound like harmless research. Family land. Old equipment. Goodwin's estate. Maggie didn't ask more, but her eyes narrowed when he mentioned Goodwin. "They say he built machines for the government," she said, handing him the 1919 drawer. "But there were rumors. After the war, some shipments went missing. Metal, tools, raw materials, gold," Walter asked casually. She froze for a second too long. "No one said that word back then," she replied softly. "But something disappeared, and the investigation dropped." Quietly. Walter sifted through the pages. Grainy headlines, factory photos, reports of returning soldiers, economic rebounds. Then he found it. A small article buried in the Midwest Industrial Review dated April 1920. Goodwin Iron Works faces. Brief inquiry. War Department auditors closed an investigation into lost shipping manifests tied to the Whitlock-based manufacturer. Records deemed incomplete. No charges filed. Another article 3 months later, warehouse fire destroys records at Goodwin facility. Blaze deemed accidental. No injuries reported. After that, Goodwin's name disappeared, vanished from headlines, from history. Walter sat back in the chair, the hum of the microfilm machine whirring beside him. It was all being buried. The war, the money, the evidence. Until now. Maggie walked in with 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, offering him one. He took it, hands shaking slightly. "I think I bought one." She tilted her head. He almost told her everything. The gold, the papers, the map. But something stopped him. Instead, he just said, "Thanks." As he left the library, the street outside felt different. Shadows longer. People too still. Across the street, a man stood in the alley between 2 shops. Black coat, hat pulled low, face hidden in the gloom. Walter turned to look fully, but the man stepped back into shadow and was gone. That night, Walter returned home and checked the barn. Nothing moved, but he left the light on anyway. Just in case. They didn't just take the map. They left a message. Walter said the words quietly, as if speaking any louder might summon whoever had come through his door in the night. It was early, barely past 6. The house was cold, the light gray and thin through the kitchen window. Coffee steamed on the counter untouched. He hadn't slept. Not really. Not since he found that man in the alley watching him. But it wasn't the watching that haunted him now. It was what was missing. He stood in the barn staring at the grain bin. The false floor was still in place. Nothing obvious disturbed. But when he lifted it, heart hammering, he knew instantly something had changed. The bundles were there. The gold. The papers. But the map, the one marked with red lines, the one with Whitlock at the center, was gone. And in its place was a folded slip of paper. He didn't touch it right away. Just stared. Like a snake had slithered into a child's crib. Eli stepped up beside him, silent until now. He'd stayed the night in the guest room, both of them too rattled to be alone. When he saw Walter frozen there, he didn't ask. He saw the missing map and the paper. Walter picked it up slowly like it might bite. typed same style as the last one. We asked you once. You're still reaching for something that doesn't belong to you. This is your final warning. No name, no seal, no fingerprints either, he checked. The kind of note that didn't come from amateurs. He read it again, then passed it to Eli. They didn't just take the map, Walter said. They left a message. Eli nodded grimly. Which means they were in your house, not just the barn. Walter didn't answer. He already knew. His office had been disturbed, subtle things. A drawer he never used slightly open. A coaster missing from his desk. Even the coffee pot looked like it had been wiped clean. Professional. Quiet. A warning, yes. But also a display of reach. We can get in. We can take what we want. And we'll be gone before you know we were here. Walter sat on the bench by the barn wall, shoulders slumped. Eli paced. We have to assume they copied the map before they left. So wherever it led, whatever's at that endpoint, they're going after it now. And we're behind, Walter muttered. Eli rubbed the back of his neck. Unless we get someone else involved. Someone who can trace the map's origin, find out who had access, who would know how to track old military cargo. Walter glanced up, eyes narrowing. You thinking press? Eli didn't flinch. I'm thinking Sarah Keller. The name snapped something awake inside Walter's chest. Sarah Keller, freelance investigative journalist known for dismantling cover-ups the government pretended never existed. Her pieces ran in fringe outlets, yes, but they carried weight. She was smart, unafraid. And most importantly, she had a reputation for surviving stories no one else would touch. You think she'd listen? Walter asked. She covered the Cimarron project leak. She chased the Dobbins munitions scandal when every other outlet buried it. This gold, government conspiracy, buried secrets from a century ago, she'd kill for it. Walter hesitated only a second, then nodded. They made the call from the gas station down on Highway 15 using a burner phone Eli kept in his glove box, leftover paranoia from his contracting days. Walter gave the brief version. No details, just enough to hook her. An hour later, she texted back. I'll be there by midnight. No phones, no recordings, just eyes and ears. Walter deleted the message, burned the SIM card. Then they waited. She arrived late. Black SUV, no headlights until the last half mile. She parked behind the barn, stepped out wearing a windbreaker and jeans, her blonde hair pulled under a cap. Sarah Keller wasn't flashy, but she radiated intensity. Sharp eyes, no wasted movement. She shook Walter's hand without a smile. You still have the bars? He nodded. You show me those and I decide whether I stay. Fair enough. He led her into the barn, unsealed the bin, and unwrapped one bundle. She stared at the gold bar like it had spoken to her. Then she exhaled. Well, shit. That's real. More than that, Eli added, handing her one of the documents. Read the stamps. Sarah took the paper, read the headers, her brow furrowing. Manifest, War Department seal, but this is pre-World War II. You weren't kidding. Walter stepped in. There was a map, hidden in the same place, gone now. She looked up. You think someone's watching? I know they are, Walter replied. I think they've been waiting for someone to find this. Sarah circled the barn, looking over the Titan like it was a crime scene. Any idea what it was doing here in Nebraska? Walter told her everything, the auction, the sealed compartment, the map's markings. Sarah listened without interrupting. Then she nodded to herself. Goodwin Ironworks, she said softly. I remember that name. Showed up in a few declassified files I looked at years ago. They made steam haulers, sure, but also experimental transport rigs, ones capable of long-distance moves under heavy load. Quiet transport, perfect for moving illicit cargo. You think this was a smuggling op? Walter asked. Sarah shook her head. No. Bigger. This wasn't just about money. This was coordinated. Government docs altered manifests, hidden storage inside a farm machine. And if someone still cares about it, that means something never got resolved. Eli leaned forward. We're missing the map. Can you track the endpoints from the documents? Sarah nodded slowly. If you've got serial numbers, shipment logs, yeah, I can try. But I'll need time. And I'll need a secure place to work. No internet. No surveillance. Walter motioned to the basement. There's a root cellar. No lines. No Wi-Fi. Iron walls. She smiled just barely. You do paranoia well. I had to learn fast. That night, Sarah worked in the cellar, scanning and logging each document into her encrypted drive. Walter brought her coffee every few hours. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. But around 2 a.m., Walter returned from the bathroom to find Eli standing by the front window. His face was pale. Walter moved beside him. There on the gravel road beyond the fence sat a black car. Headlights off. Motor running. No movement. No sound. Just presence. Walter's mouth went dry. They're here, Eli said quietly. They already know she's inside. They didn't sleep that night. By dawn, the car was gone. But when Sarah came up from the cellar, she already had her bag on her shoulder. I need to disappear for a few days, she said. If they know I'm here, I've already stayed too long. Walter tried to argue. She cut him off. I have enough to follow the trail. Let me do that. I'll send coordinates when I find where the map was leading. You just stay alive long enough to meet me there. She squeezed his hand once. Then she was gone. No headlights, no trail, just like the car on the road. By nightfall, Walter sat on his porch alone again. A chill moved through the wind sharper than before. He felt it in his chest, not fear exactly. Something colder. Resolve. Because the people behind that map didn't want money. They wanted silence. And they were willing to erase anyone to keep it. You're not the only one watching. Walter stared at the words, hands trembling slightly as he unfolded the note. The paper was folded precisely like a hospital corner on a deathbed. Same typewriter ink. Same cold precision. But this time it hadn't been left in the barn, or tucked inside the bin. It was on his pillow. He stood in the bedroom doorway, shotgun in one hand, the note in the other, heart thundering like hooves on wet ground. Eli came around the corner a second later, saw the open bedroom, and the look on Walter's face told him everything. They were in the house again. Walter nodded once, jaw locked, while we were outside, on the porch, not even 10 feet away. Eli's expression darkened. He stepped into the room, scanned the window still latched. No footprints on the sill, no signs of forced entry. Whoever had left that note was either a ghost or highly trained. They're escalating, Eli said. Before they left, warnings. Now it's personal. Walter's eyes swept the room slow and searching. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. But that was the point, wasn't it? They didn't want to destroy anything. Not yet. They wanted control. But control over what he moved to the barn in silence. It was instinct now. Routine. Check the grain bin. Make sure the gold and documents were still there. But when he lifted the false floor, his stomach dropped. One bundle was gone. The lightest one. The second bundle, the one that had contained mostly documents. Not the gold. They didn't come for the money. They came for the proof. Eli stood over his shoulder, mouth drawn in a hard line. They're trimming loose ends, burning paper before it becomes fire. Walter lowered the false floor again, slower this time, like he was sealing a coffin. "We have to find Sarah," he said. "Now." But that was the problem. Sarah Keller had vanished. She was supposed to message them with coordinates. A drop point. Anything. But it had been 3 days since she left. No texts, no calls, no digital footprint. Eli had tried every back-channel contact he had. Old numbers, encrypted emails, message boards. Nothing. Either she was gone intentionally, or someone had made sure she went dark. Walter didn't want to consider the second option. "She wouldn't just disappear," he said, pacing the porch. "Not without sending something." Eli didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. Walter ran a hand through his graying hair, then stopped suddenly. "She gave me something," he said, "before she left. A flash drive." He rushed into the house, Eli on his heels. They dug through the drawer in the kitchen where Walter had tossed it, like it had meant nothing at the time. The drive was there. Black, unmarked, ordinary. Walter plugged it into his old laptop, the one with no Wi-Fi card and a dead battery always kept unplugged unless in use. Paranoia had its perks. A folder opened. Trailhead. Inside were scans of the map photos of the gold bars and a document titled Operation Casket. Eli leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. "I've heard that name before. Classified initiative. Post-WI. Something about intelligence assets moving through civilian channels." Walter clicked the document. It was a decrypted report, barely legible in some places, as if it had been run through 100 duplications. But one section stood out: material reallocation under pretense of decommissioning. Civilian transport repurposed to avoid international audit trails. Assets hidden until safe retrieval could be ensured. Another paragraph underlined in red Whitlock node designated as tertiary storage. Primary directive: conceal, await recall. Walter's chest tightened. Tertiary storage. This farm, his land, was a drop site, and he had unknowingly unearthed what others had buried by design. "Jesus Christ," Eli muttered. "They used farms like this as blind spots. Moved money weapons, who knows what, under the radar." Walter looked up. "Then there are other sites. Not just here." Eli nodded slowly. "And if they took the map, they know where they all are." Walter stared at the screen, trying to focus, to think through the adrenaline fog. Then the laptop screen flickered. Just once. Then again. And then a line of text appeared in the document, typing itself in real time. "We see you." Eli lunged forward, yanking the power cable. "Offline. Now." The screen went dark. Walter's mouth was dry. They were in the system. Eli nodded grimly. Air-gapped or not, that drive was infected. Trojan horse. They baited Sarah, used her as a conduit. Walter's heart pounded. "So she's—" "We don't know," Eli said. "But if she's alive, they'll want to use her." Walter leaned back, breath ragged. "This isn't about gold anymore. It's not even about secrets." "No," Eli agreed. "It's about control of the narrative. If the wrong person finds out how deep this goes, how many hands were dirty, then everything collapses. Walter walked to the window. The fields stretched out, quiet wind moving the tall grass in waves. But nothing felt calm. He pulled his phone, considered calling the sheriff, then remembered who else might be listening. He tossed it onto the counter and reached for the landline. Instead, the rotary one built into the kitchen wall. "Who are you calling?" Eli asked. Walter paused with his hand on the dial. "Someone who still owes me a favor. Guy who worked logistics out of Camp Hale back in the 70s. If anyone knows how these operations were buried, it's him." Eli stepped back. "You trust him, no?" Walter said. "But I don't have to trust him. I just have to know what he remembers." That night, as Walter returned from chopping firewood, he found something sitting in the center of his porch. A small black box. No writing. He picked it up cautiously. Inside was a single earbud wireless blinking red once, and a handwritten note. Midnight. "Listen." Alone. Eli stepped out, saw the box, and froze. Walter held up the note. "No more warnings," he said. Eli looked at him. "Then what is this?" Walter's grip tightened. A summons. The earbud clicked once, then silence. Walter stood on the porch, the wind stiff with frost, as the house behind him exhaled tired wood groans. The black box lay open on the railing. He slipped the tiny device into his ear. Midnight, just like the note said. The world held its breath. Then a voice, mechanical and cold, filtered through the bud. "Walter Mitchell," it said, flat, but unmistakably human. Male, older, measured. "I trust you understand now that this is not a negotiation. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Something that was never supposed to be found." Walter gritted his teeth. "And you have someone who doesn't belong to you." The voice didn't respond. Instead, it continued. "Her name is Sarah Keller. She's alive, for now, but her presence has become problematic. She accessed files, downloaded restricted data, information meant to remain classified indefinitely." A pause. "She is being held in a controlled facility, alive, unharmed." Walter's grip on the railing tightened. "You want her back?" the voice asked. "You want this to end without blood?" Walter's breath caught. "Say it." The voice replied without emotion. "Bring the remaining gold to Denver, Union Station, locker 114. You'll leave it there, alone, unwatched. You'll walk away. If you're followed, if you stall, if you alert law enforcement." A faint click echoed through the audio. "Sarah Keller dies." Walter yanked the earbud out and hurled it into the darkness. It landed somewhere in the yard with a faint thud against the dead grass. Eli was already on the porch by the time Walter turned around, breathing hard. "What did they say?" Walter didn't answer immediately. He just stared out at the black Nebraska horizon and said quietly, "They have her, and they want the gold." Eli's fists clenched. "You can't give it to them." Walter looked him in the eye. "She risked everything to help us. She's the reason we even understand what's happening. I can't just leave her." "Walt, this is a setup. You show up with that gold, they take it, and you vanish. Then Sarah's still gone and we've lost everything." Walter paced the porch. "So what's the move? We do nothing." "Let them run the board." Eli thought for a second. "We give them what they want, but not how they expect." The next morning was spent preparing. Walter dug the remaining gold out from beneath the false floor, each bar heavy with history and consequence. He packed them into a nondescript black duffel lined with foam and wrapped in an old veteran's blanket from his father's chest. But he didn't stop there. Inside the lining of the duffel, Eli carefully planted two things: a GPS tracker, military-grade, dead silent, undetectable unless you knew exactly where to look. A thin camera lens disguised as part of the zipper's plastic pull. "I need eyes in that locker," Walter said. "If I'm walking into hell, I want to know what's waiting." They rehearsed the drop, mapped the station's layout, and synchronized watches. Eli wouldn't be nearby, that would break the rules. But he'd be tracking from a secure van parked 3 blocks away, plugged into a laptop, with a clean feed from the bag's hidden tech. "You sure you can handle this?" Eli asked, as Walter slung the duffel over his shoulder that night. Walter nodded once. "It's not the first time I've walked into the lion's den." Eli raised a brow. "Just the first time you brought treasure with you." Walter didn't smile. Denver's Union Station stood lit like a beacon against the dark, a restored temple of steel and stone polished for tourists and politicians. But tonight, under the skin of all its charm, it felt like a pressure cooker. Walter moved fast. No stalling, no hesitations. He entered through the west entrance, boots clicking on tile duffel swinging at his side. Every figure in the crowd looked suspicious. The man sipping coffee too slowly, the woman with her face buried in a newspaper, the teenager with both eyes on a phone, but one hand twitching toward a jacket pocket. He ignored them all. Locker 114. Near the east stairwell, painted navy, a digital code panel mounted on the front. He punched in the code they had received via text from a scrambled burner earlier that day, 6119. Click. The door popped open. He slid the bag in gently, closed it, locked it. No one stopped him. No one followed. At least not that he could see. Walter exited the station through the south terminal, walked 3 blocks, didn't turn around once, got into the white van Eli had rented and pulled the door shut behind him. Eli was already at the screen. The feed from the locker camera was live. They watched. For 10 minutes, no one approached. Then, at exactly 12:40 a.m., a man appeared. Gray trench coat, scarf, balding head, no hat. He didn't look around. He didn't hesitate. He punched in the code. The locker opened. He reached in, grabbed the bag, carried it away like he was picking up dry cleaning. Eli tracked him. Camera 2 locked. He's heading east on foot, taking him toward Market Street. Walter leaned in. "Let's follow." They did. 4 blocks later, the man ducked into a nondescript black sedan. No plates. The feed cut out. "Damn," Eli muttered. "Signal interference. Deliberate." Walter sat back, fists clenched. Then his burner phone buzzed. One message. "She's still breathing. You'll see her soon." No signature. No instructions. Just that. Walter stared at the screen for a long time. Then another message came through. This one with coordinates. Somewhere deep in the Colorado mountains. Middle of nowhere. No cell towers. No roads marked on public maps. "Looks like they want a face-to-face," Eli said. Walter nodded slowly. "They're going to make me choose. Her or the truth." Eli turned toward him. "So what are we going to give them?" Walter's eyes narrowed. His voice came cold. "Neither." The road to nowhere was paved in silence and frost. Walter gripped the steering wheel tight as their SUV snaked along the jagged trail into the Colorado wilderness. The elevation thinned the air, but not the tension. Each curve in the road felt like a warning, each gust of wind a whisper to turn back. They'd left Denver behind 4 hours ago, past the last gas station, past the last cell tower. The coordinates had taken them into a part of the map that most folks ignored: government land, unmarked terrain, the kind of place where no one asked questions because no one knew what existed. Eli rode shotgun, a loaded Glock tucked under his coat, and eyes fixed on the tree line. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes, not since they passed the rusted fence post marked only by a number 1919, a number Walter had seen before, on the war documents, on the shipping manifests, on the side of the Titan. "You see that?" Walter asked, slowing down. Eli nodded. Same year everything went missing. They pulled over and stepped out. The cold bit hard, sharper here, more biting. The mountain air didn't carry birdsong, just wind and the faint creak of dead trees swaying in place. Ahead, nestled into the slope like it had been grown there, stood a facility, half buried in the hillside, all concrete and steel. No signs, no windows. Just a single reinforced door with a keypad. Walter felt a shiver crawl down his spine. "Looks like a bunker," Eli muttered. "Cold War style, but too clean. Someone's been maintaining this." Walter approached slowly. As he did, the keypad lit up. No prompt, no instructions, just the glow. He stared at it. Then he heard it. A hiss. Then static. Then the voice. "You were never supposed to survive this long." It echoed from a hidden speaker above the door, distant and godless. Eli's hand moved to his gun. Walter stepped closer. "Where's Sarah?" The voice didn't answer the question. Instead, the door clicked, then creaked open a few inches. Beyond it, shadow. Walter glanced at Eli. They entered. The air inside was colder than outside, unnatural, like a morgue. The hallway was long and narrow, lit by buzzing fluorescent strips embedded in the ceiling. Cameras tracked them silently. At the end of the corridor, another door waited. No keypad this time. It opened before they touched it. Inside, a control room. Banks of monitors. Walls of file cabinets. Machinery humming low. And in the center, standing beneath a single spotlight, was a man. Older. Trim. Military posture. Gray suit. Sharp eyes. Walter froze. He knew that face. He'd seen it in an old photo once buried in a file labeled Goodwin Holdings. "You're Major Kavanaugh," Walter said. The man nodded once. "You remember. I remember your name on requisition forms tied to the missing cargo. I remember your face in the background of a medal ceremony for Goodwin. And I remember your signature on the transfer papers for Unit 47EO. The man smiled faintly. "You've come farther than most." "Where is she?" Walter asked. Kavanaugh gestured to a side door. "She's alive. Sedated. She saw too much and she's a fighter. We don't like fighters." Eli's voice was cold. "So what now? You kill us and bury this place again and pretend it never happened." Kavanaugh didn't flinch. "You're not the threat. Not anymore. The threat was what you could have proven. But we removed the documents, reclaimed the map, shut down your network. You're here because we needed to be sure there were no final threads." Walter stepped forward. "You don't understand what you buried. That gold, those documents, they're more than corruption. They're evidence of a second war waged under the flag of peace. You stole from a nation, from soldiers." Kavanaugh tilted his head. "And yet no one remembers. Isn't that fascinating? Walter's fists clenched. History isn't erased by fire, he said. It just waits to be dug up again. Kavanaugh turned to one of the monitors. It showed live satellite footage, grainy but clear. The barn, Walter's land, the Titan. You think this is about theft? Kavanaugh asked. It's about design. We orchestrated the post-war economy. We injected capital into silent channels, bought allegiances, built the post-war structure on foundations no one could question because no one even knew they existed. Walter stared at the screen. You used my family's land. Yes, Kavanaugh said calmly. Your father was paid well. He never asked questions. He thought he was storing equipment. He never knew he was guarding a fortune. Walter's voice cracked. He died believing he was nothing more than a farmer. Kavanaugh turned to him. He was a farmer, one who helped win a war he didn't understand, like so many others. Eli stepped between them. Enough. You said Sarah's alive. We want her. And then we walk. Kavanaugh looked amused. Walk where? Back to the world that won't believe you. Back to a town that's already under quiet observation. You don't walk away from this. You just fade. Walter drew a slow breath, then said quietly, Not if we light it up first. Kavanaugh's expression flickered. That's when Eli triggered the dead man transmitter in his boot. Back in the SUV, a secure relay began uploading the flash drive Sarah had built. The documents, the manifests, the scans, everything. Eli smiled. Your firewall's good. Ours is better. Kavanaugh's voice sharpened. That was a mistake. From the wall, 2 guards appeared, rifles raised. But Walter was ready. He stepped to the side, kicked the table hard, knocking a console over, sparks flying. Eli fired once, just a warning shot. Chaos. Walter lunged for the side door, knowing what was behind it. Sarah. He barreled through, inside a small medical bay. Sarah lay on a gurney, eyes fluttering. Tubes in her arm, heart monitor beeping, slow and steady. Walter ripped the IV from her arm, cradled her head. Sarah, he whispered. You're okay. I'm here. Her eyes opened just a sliver. Told you not to trust anyone. I didn't, Walter said. Except the right ones. Eli appeared in the doorway. We have 60 seconds. Max. They carried her out the back exit. Emergency lights blared red. Alarms howled. Somewhere Kavanaugh shouted orders, but they were already gone. They reached the SUV, Sarah barely conscious in the back seat. As Walter started the engine, the monitor beside Eli flashed. Upload complete. Walter stepped on the gas. Where to now? Eli asked. Walter didn't hesitate. Home. The first story broke at 8:15 a.m. Eastern. A blog post from an independent outlet based in D.C., quoting anonymous whistleblower documents related to wartime gold trafficking. A few hours later, 2 podcasts were dissecting the implications. By noon, a retired intelligence analyst on a fringe news channel referenced Operation Casket by name. By evening, the fire had jumped containment. Cable networks debated whether the documents were real. Government spokespeople dodged. The White House issued a generic statement. We take all whistleblower claims seriously. But no one denied anything, because they couldn't. The leak had been clean. Dozens of files, photos, scans, every receipt and manifest Sarah had unearthed uploaded from Eli's dead man trigger in the bunker. It had spread like a virus, copied and redistributed before any agency could yank it down. Walter watched it unfold from his living room, a mug of black coffee shaking slightly in his hand. Sarah sat on the couch beside him, wrapped in a quilt, pale but recovering. Her voice was still scratchy from the sedation, but her mind was sharp. She scrolled silently through Twitter on Eli's burner tablet. Across the room, Eli stood near the window, with a pair of binoculars watching the long dirt road that ran through the soybean field. They were back home. But they weren't safe. The barn had been checked twice already that morning. Once by a local mechanic who wanted to see the Titan again, and once by a lost FedEx driver who had no packages and left without turning around. Both left fast when Eli showed up with a shotgun. "They're casing us," Eli said. "Not feds, not state police, but someone with uniforms, cars, and no ID." Walter nodded, trying to see how far we'll push this. "They're not just scared," Sarah added. "They're embarrassed. That's worse." Walter glanced over. "Why worse? Because scared people hide," she said. "Embarrassed people destroy." He sat down slowly beside her, the weight of it all pressing in. "What happens now?" Sarah tilted her head, considering. "If it plays out the way I think, congressional pressure. Investigations, maybe an independent commission. But not before someone tries to rewrite the entire narrative." Eli scoffed. "Rewrite it? They buried it for a century." Sarah turned to him. "Which means they've had time to build their own version. One that makes them look like reluctant patriots instead of thieves." Walter leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Some people won't kill to protect secrets. They'll kill to protect their version of the truth." Sarah nodded slowly. "And now their truth is crumbling." That night a car approached the farmhouse slowly. No headlights. Tires soft on gravel. Eli caught it first. He met Walter at the front door, both of them armed. The car stopped just outside the gate. The driver stepped out and raised both hands. No weapon. Just a face Walter hadn't seen in decades. Thin. Weathered. Pale blue eyes behind steel-framed glasses. Walter stepped forward slowly, disbelief in his voice. "Jonas." The man nodded. "Hello, Walt." Jonas Whitaker, Walter's cousin. Thought dead 22 years ago in a car crash outside St. Louis. Only now he wasn't dead. He was standing on Walter's property like he'd never left. Walter lowered his weapon cautiously. Eli didn't. Jonas held up his hands. "I know how this looks. I know what it sounds like. But I didn't fake my death. It was done for me." Walter's voice was low. "Start talking." Jonas stepped forward slower now. "They came for me in '03. I'd uncovered part of the casket trail during a contracting job overseas. Logistics routing through Eastern Europe. Shipments tied to decommissioned units from 1918. I followed the paper trail too far. They erased me." Eli stepped forward, suspicious. "So how are you here now, Iran?" Jonas said. Then I watched. "I kept tabs. I saw your name pop up 6 months ago in a flagged sale. You bought a Titan that matched a model tied to the original casket transport. I knew it had to be something." Walter swallowed hard. "So you let me take the fall?" "No," Jonas said. "I knew you'd do what I couldn't. I couldn't expose it, Walt. But you had nothing left to lose." Silence stretched long between them. Then Sarah stepped onto the porch. Her eyes met Jonas's. "You're the one who sent the second map fragment." Jonas nodded once. "I had to keep you moving. Had to make sure you stayed ahead of them." Eli lowered his weapon slightly. "So why show up now?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "Because they know where you are. They've always known. They're coming, and this time they're not bringing warnings. They're bringing a solution. Walter's blood ran cold. You mean they're going to kill us? Jonas nodded. You, Sarah, Eli, and me. Walter looked to the field, the barn, his father's land. Everything he'd built and everything buried under it. We're not leaving, he said. Jonas stepped forward. Then you'll need proof stronger than documents. Walter turned to Sarah. Do we have enough? She hesitated. We've given them evidence. But if we want justice, we need a confession. Someone high up. Someone still inside the machine. Walter looked back at Jonas. You know someone? Jonas gave the faintest nod. I know where they are. 2 hours later, they sat around the dining table with every file, photo, and scrap of evidence laid out. Sarah marked connections. Jonas outlined the chain of command behind Operation Casket, naming people who had since vanished, been promoted or rebranded themselves as legitimate contractors. But one name stood out. Richard Alden, Jonas said. He wasn't a general. He was a facilitator. The one who ensured Casket never saw daylight. If there's anyone who can tie this together, it's him. Walter blinked. I know that name. My dad had a letter from him. Said he was arranging secure delivery. He never retired, Jonas said. He runs a private defense network now. Mostly logistics shell companies. But he still keeps one property registered to his name. He slid a paper across the table. An address in Virginia. Sarah stared at it. So we go to him. Walter looked at Eli, then back to Sarah and Jonas. No, he said. We don't go to him. We make him come to us. They picked the bait carefully. Not the gold. Not the maps. Not even the flash drive. It was the letter, a personal handwritten note from Richard Alden to Walter's father, dated March 12th, 1920. A thank you for discretion and loyalty during a special logistics effort sealed with Alden's personal signature and an old military sigil long since abandoned. Jonas had found the original months ago buried in the back of a declassified Army storage room he'd bribed his way into. He'd scanned it, cleaned it, forged a second copy so real, even the ink bled like history. They posted it anonymously on a secure veterans forum known for conspiracy chatter and leaked archives. They gave it just enough time to catch the right eyes, then pulled it offline. Too late. Within hours, the trap was baited, and someone was coming. But it wasn't Alden. The SUV arrived just past midnight. Blacked-out windows, government tags scrubbed, but the armor plating wasn't subtle. It rolled to a stop near the barn. The engine cut. One door opened. The figure that stepped out wasn't tall or young or dressed for subterfuge. She wore a tan coat, gray slacks, and a pair of glasses that made her look like a librarian, if librarians carried sidearms and carried themselves like generals. Sarah's breath caught as she looked through the curtain. That's not Alden. Eli adjusted the scope on his rifle, posted from the second-floor window. Who is she? Jonas squinted. Emmeline Frost. Alden's fixer. Intelligence operative turned corporate hammer. She cleans problems, quietly. Walter moved toward the door. So she's here to clean us or to offer something worse, Sarah said. Walter stepped onto the porch, his breath rising in clouds. The woman Frost stood 20 feet away, unarmed, gloved hands behind her back. He didn't say a word. She did. Mr. Mitchell. She began calm and casual. You've made quite a mess. Truth has a way of doing that, Walter replied. She smiled faintly. Truth is relative, but narrative, that's power. Walter kept a safe distance. You're not Alden. No, she said. Alden doesn't get his hands dirty anymore. I do that for him. You're too late. The files are out. The story's live. You can't bury this. We're not trying to bury it, she said. We're trying to frame it. She stepped forward slowly. There's a window here, Mr. Mitchell. A narrow one. We let the story live but shape it. You become a confused veteran uncovering a Cold War relic. The gold becomes symbolic. The documents become historical. Alden's name is never spoken. Everyone sleeps easier. And Sarah Walter asked, Jonas, Eli. Me your patriots, she said. The country loves a good redemption arc. You go home. You keep your lives. Walter narrowed his eyes. And the truth, Frost shrugged. It gets absorbed, diluted. Like all truth eventually does. Silence. Then Frost said, If you decline this offer, Mr. Mitchell, I can't protect what happens next. Walter stared at her. The wind whistled across the field, tugging at his coat. I'm not here to be protected, he said. I'm here to finish what my father never could. Frost's smile faded. She took one last look at the barn, the house, the stars above, then turned and walked away. As she climbed into the SUV, she glanced back once. Sometimes to stay ahead, you have to lose something that matters. Then she was gone. The first drone hit an hour later. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just a flicker of movement in the sky. A faint hum. Then fire. The east side of the barn exploded in a cascade of flame and debris. The Titan took the brunt of it. The old machine shuddering, but holding. The back wall buckled. One of the beams collapsed. Walter was already hauling Sarah toward the cellar. Jonas dragged a duffel full of documents and backup drives. Eli swept the hallway, pistol drawn. They're not coming to talk, he said. No, Walter growled. They're coming to erase. More drones came. 3 total. Only 1 hit. The others circled, scanning, watching, threatening. Then headlights appeared down the road. 5 black SUVs. Fast. Clean. No sirens. Back entrance, Walter ordered. They moved fast out through the cornfield into the tree line. The van was stashed under a camo tarp a half-mile away, but they were already behind. Jonas stumbled. One of the drives slipped from his bag and hit the dirt. Walter turned back for it. Leave it, Eli shouted. It's the deposit logs, Walter barked. Without this, it's just gold. He dove, grabbed it, rolled behind a hay bale as gunfire tore through the air. The first SUV had stopped and armed agents fanned out. They weren't shouting orders, just moving, executing. Jonas took a hit in the shoulder but kept going. Eli laid down cover fire. Sarah fired 3 rounds and hit one attacker in the thigh enough to slow the line. They reached the van. The engine roared to life, but Walter was still behind. He sprinted, dodging fire, the drive clutched in his hands. Then he stopped. In front of him, Emmeline Frost. No gun, just standing there, calm. She looked at him with something almost like pity. Why he shouted over the wind. Why destroy everything she didn't blink? Because chaos invites curiosity, and curiosity leads to more truth. Walter stared at her, then turned and ran. He didn't look back. The van tore down the road, bouncing on loose gravel. Sarah applied pressure to Jonas's wound. Eli drove like hell. Walter clutched the drive in both hands. We lost the house, Sarah said. Walter didn't respond. She touched his arm gently. We still have the story. He looked at her. then down at the drive. And for the first time that night he smiled just barely. "They want to shape the truth," he said. "Let's show them what a real story looks like." The sky above D.C. was smeared with storm clouds, as if the city itself sensed the weight of what was coming. The air buzzed with an electric tension that made even the pigeons twitchy. Walter stared out the car window as they crossed the Key Bridge into the city. Every monument felt like a silent witness to what they were about to do. "You sure about this?" Eli asked from the driver's seat, glancing at Walter in the rearview mirror. Walter didn't answer immediately. Sarah sat beside him in the back, clutching the external drive like it was a loaded weapon, which in a way it was. "It's not just about being sure," Walter finally said. "It's about finishing it." Jonas, bandaged but alert, sat beside Eli up front. "Once this is out there, there's no going back. We'll all be targets." "We already are," Sarah muttered. "Only difference now is whether the story dies with us or lives beyond us." They parked at a run-down motel in Arlington. It was the kind of place where cash was king and questions were bad etiquette. The paint peeled off the door frames. The AC units rattled like dying engines. Walter loved it instantly. They moved fast. Within minutes, laptops were booted up, firewalls were engaged, and VPNs were active. Sarah and Jonas began compiling the evidence, not just dumping files, but organizing them into a coherent story. Walter knew they only had one shot. The message had to land like a hammer. Meanwhile, Eli set up a perimeter, placing cameras and motion sensors along the hallway and parking lot. They'd already been burned once. There would be no surprises this time. At 3:47 p.m., Lena Park arrived. Petite, sharp-eyed, and brimming with quiet intensity, she walked into the room like she owned it. She glanced at the scattered maps, the laptop screens, and the tension in the room before setting down her worn leather satchel. "You the farmer?" she asked, eyes on Walter. He cracked a dry smile. "I used to be." "Well," she said, unzipping her bag, "today you're going to be the mouthpiece for one of the biggest cover-ups in American history." She worked like a surgeon, fast, precise, unflinching. Within 20 minutes, she had a secure live stream rig set up. Backup routes, redundant relays, air-gapped systems. Everything ran through a triple encrypted satellite connection, disguised as a weather station ping. The moment they pressed record, the signal would spread across social media video platforms, encrypted archives, and a dozen mirrored sites in countries the U.S. couldn't touch. "This will go everywhere," Lena said. "But it'll make you the most wanted man in the country by sunrise." Walter looked at her, then at Sarah, Jonas, and Eli. "Good," he said. "Let them try." The lights dimmed. A warm spotlight clicked on behind the laptop. Lena adjusted the mic. Sarah stood at the ready to switch slides supporting documents and photos as Walter spoke. Then Lena nodded. "We're live in 3, 2... Walter looked into the camera and began. "My name is Walter Mitchell," he said. "I'm a farmer from Whitlock, Colorado. Or at least I used to be. I thought I inherited land. Turns out I inherited a secret." He walked viewers through everything: how he'd bought an old Titan tractor at an estate sale, how he'd found a hidden chamber welded under its frame filled with pre-Federal Reserve gold and military documentation, how that discovery led him down a trail of hidden archives, fabricated maps, and ghost operations stretching back to World War I. Sarah added documents in real-time shipment manifests, signed by officers' long presumed dead ledger entries from banks that had been closed since 1930, and photographs of storage units buried deep under private farmland. Walter continued, his voice growing harder. This wasn't just theft. It wasn't just deception. This was betrayal. Betrayal of soldiers who died thinking they served something noble. betrayal of families like mine used as pawns, and betrayal of the American people. He paused for a moment. They'll say this is fake, that I'm delusional, that it's a hoax, but I've got proof, not just in these files, but in every lie they'll tell you tomorrow. You'll know it's true because they'll scramble to deny it before they even understand what we've shown them. The final image appeared behind him, the Titan scorched from the drone strike, but still standing half-buried in smoke and memory. Walter leaned forward, eyes locked on the lens. You don't end a story like this with a bullet. You end it with a broadcast. Lena killed the feed. They sat in silence. The broadcast was already being mirrored, clipped, subtitled. Within minutes, hashtags began trending. Titan Gold. Operation Casket. Actual files. Cable networks scrambled to respond. Some called it the leak of the decade. Others labeled it an act of domestic treason. The White House press secretary was ambushed with questions she couldn't answer. Meanwhile, independent journalists began dissecting every file from the archive. Walter turned to Lena. Thank you. She shrugged. I don't do this for thanks. At that moment, Jonas's phone lit up. He answered. Silence. Then it's him. Walter stiffened. Alden Jonas nodded. He wants to meet. 1 hour. Section 60, Arlington Cemetery. Walter exchanged a glance with Sarah. He's making it personal. Jonas said, it's a setup. Of course it is, Eli muttered. But we go, Walter said. Why, Sarah asked. You just won. Walter looked her in the eyes. Because this isn't about me anymore. It's about what comes next. The story's live, but the truth needs an ending. Sarah stared at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. She found none. Eli slid a pistol into his coat. We go together. Walter shook his head. No. I go alone. Hell you are, Eli growled. Walter placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. If he sees you, he walks away. But if I show up unarmed alone, he might talk. And if I get it on tape, it'll be the nail in the coffin. Sarah's voice cracked. And what if he doesn't talk? Walter gave her a soft smile. Then I make sure my last words are worth broadcasting. The winter wind cut through Arlington Cemetery, like a blade rustling the flags and bending the grass that curled around the headstones. Walter stood under the old sycamore in Section 60, alone for a moment, that seemed to stretch through decades. The weight of a century rested on his shoulders, not just from the files they had released, but from the faces of the forgotten, the voices buried under concrete and silence. Alden arrived exactly on time. Dressed in a dark wool coat, gloves sharp as his words, he moved like the cold didn't touch him. He paused a few feet away, eyes sweeping over the rows of marble before resting on Walter. You look like hell, he said. Walter didn't smile. I've been living in it. Alden let out a sigh, more tired than mocking. I warned you what would happen. You lit the match, and now you're surprised everything's burning. Walter shook his head. Not surprised. Just wondering why it took so long. They walked together in silence down the path toward a more secluded spot. No cameras, no earpieces, no recording this time. Just two men with too many ghosts and not enough time. Alden finally spoke. You don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly, Walter said. You built a myth and filled it with poison. I emptied the bottle. That poison stabilized empires, Alden replied coldly. It ended wars before they began. That gold, those documents, you think they were hoarded for greed, they were leverage. Leverage that kept a fragile world from tearing itself apart. Walter stopped walking. And what about the lives it destroyed? The families ruined to protect your leverage. The land seized the witnesses, silenced the veterans, used like pawns. Alden didn't flinch. You're not wrong. But we made choices. We carried the weight so the rest of the country didn't have to. Walter's voice dropped. You buried the truth because you were afraid people would see how ugly it was. Alden stepped closer, his voice low and controlled. I buried the truth because people don't want it. They want comfort. Patriotism without guilt. History without stains. You didn't just expose a conspiracy, Walter. You made America look in the mirror. And believe me, she won't thank you for it. There it was. The heart of the storm. Walter stared back, unblinking. Good, he said. Because if a nation can't face its own shadow, it doesn't deserve the light. They stood in silence, the wind tugging at their coats like time trying to carry them away. Finally, Alden reached into his coat and pulled out a worn envelope. He handed it to Walter without ceremony. Inside was a photograph. A young Walter Sr. standing next to a Titan tractor, and beside him Alden. Both men in uniform, both smiling. He believed in truth once Alden said quieter now, before he realized what it cost. Walter's hands trembled slightly. And what do you believe now? Alden looked at the headstones all around them. I believe some debts can't be paid, only carried. He turned and walked away, boots crunching slowly, deliberately, until he disappeared into the mist between the graves. Walter stood for a long while. Then he looked down at the photo again, feeling his father in the ink and paper. Back in Whitlock, the air felt different, lighter somehow, the kind of quiet that comes after the storm. But scars remained. The barn had been rebuilt, but Walter left a portion of the wall scorched and unpainted, a reminder. The Titan chassis stood beneath the rafters, stripped of gold, stripped of secrets. Just a machine again. A monument to truth. Sarah arrived one morning carrying newspapers from 6 different countries. The headlines varied in language, but the message was the same. Mitchell files confirmed gold cover-up, decades of deceit. Walter flipped through them in silence, his eyes scanning words that once would have made him shake. Now they just made him tired. They finally believe you, Sarah said, pouring coffee into his chipped mug. They believe what they're allowed to believe, Walter replied. The rest is still buried, just not as deep. She didn't argue. Outside, Jonas helped Eli install solar panels on the rebuilt shed. A local news crew had requested an interview, but Walter declined. He was done being the story. The gold, Sarah asked softly. Walter nodded toward a locked chest near the tractor. Most of it went to the Independent Foundation. Veterans reparations, historical truth funding scholarships for whistleblowers' kids. The rest, well, it's hidden again, but in better hands. Sarah looked at him. You trust people with it, no, Walter said. But I trust the idea, and that's the best I've got. On the anniversary of the broadcast, a public hearing opened in Washington. Walter didn't attend. He watched from home as senators read documents he'd uncovered, as surviving witnesses gave sworn testimony, as historians challenged the narratives taught for generations. It wasn't justice, not yet, but it was motion, and motion meant change. At the Smithsonian, the Titan was displayed behind glass. A child asked their mother what it was. The mother paused, then said, "It's a machine that helped reveal a secret." Walter smiled. That night he walked out to the edge of his field. The stars above Colorado were brighter than usual, cleaner. He listened to the wind, the creak of the new barnwood, the distant sound of Eli's generator kicking in. And for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. He took out the photo Alden gave him and pinned it to the barn wall beside the rebuilt Titan. A tribute, not just to his father, but to everyone who carried truths too heavy to name. Sarah joined him holding a small metal box. "What's that?" Walter asked. She opened it. Inside was the original map, the first breadcrumb. Walter took it and held it up to the moonlight. He traced the route with his finger. Not for treasure, not for proof, but for memory. "Are you going to follow it?" Sarah asked. Walter shook his head. "No. I followed it once. Now I leave it for someone else." She smiled. "Legacy, no," he said. "Responsibility." They stood together under the stars, quiet, resolved, and ready for whatever came next.